All right, so chapter 9 is all about late adulthood. So we'll start with physical development in late adulthood. So when we think about old age, it can be equated with loss of brain cells, intellectual capacities, energy, and sex drive. Gerontologists are specialists who study the individuals who have aged. They see considerable diversity in how people age, and late adulthood is seen as a stage in which people continue to change. Late adulthood can begin at about 65 years of age and continue until death. The definition must take into account people's functional age. Some researchers divide adulthood into three groups: young, old, and the oldest of old. When we think about young, old, we think of those with between 65 and 74 who continue to work and continue to thrive, and the old between 75 and 84 who may also work or continue to contribute to society in some way, and the oldest of old who are 85 and above. One in every eight people is 65 years or older. In 2050, 25% of the population will be over 65. The fast growing segment of our society is the oldest of old, who are over 85. Those who are over 85 have doubled in the last 20 years because people are living longer lives. And this trend occurs in every developed country around the world. So if we look at figure 9-1, we can see how the elderly flourish and how that flourishment has happened from 1960 and where it's projected to be in 2060 after 100 years. We can see that it's projected that um, people will continue to live much longer lives. And in figure 9-2, we can see the elderly population worldwide, and we can also see that those population numbers have continued to grow and are still projected to grow. Ageism can occur when people have to confront the stereotypes of late adulthood. It can manifest itself in negative attitudes about competence and attractiveness of older people. It can result in job discrimination. Sometimes cultural differences can happen when Asians and Native Americans revere the elderly and they don't engage in those ageist practices. The most negative views of elderly are often based on misinformation. There's also considered two types of aging: primary aging and secondary aging. And there are some people who show the signs of aging through their hair, their skin, and shrinking because their bones become thinner. Osteoporosis develops in about 25% of women over 60, and that's the primary cause of broken bones and preventable. It's preventable with calcium and exercise. Women often suffer a double standard as they age. They're judged more harshly when they show signs of aging, as we talked about in middle adulthood. They often dye their hair or have cosmetic surgery to slow the signs of aging, while men become more conscious of aging and may be using cosmetic products to also help them. It's generally not seen as negative with men as it is with women. Internally, older people have smaller brains and lighter brains. Their blood vessels start to shrink. They may have some respiration issues that decrease. Their digestive system is less effective, and lifestyle factors can slow all of those processes. So, this is where fitness becomes very important because it can help prevent brain tissue loss, help develop new neurons, and benefit the older person cognitively. As we talked about with adulthood, there's also a slowing of reaction time, and that slowing of reaction time could result in slowed ability to process things and more accidents as well. Vision issues may also be a problem. The lens can be less transparent and the pupils can shrink. The optic nerves are less efficient. The distance vision becomes less acute. The more light is needed to see. Longer light and dark adaptation are necessary. It can be hard to drive at night. reading can become more difficult, and cataracts or glaucoma could result in the need for surgery. Hearing is also impacted in old age, with 30% of people between 65 and 74 having hearing loss. 50% of those over 75 have hearing loss. And those highest frequency sounds are the hardest to hear because those hair cells die out and they don't regenerate. Hearing aids can help, and only 20% of people actually wear them. People may withdraw from social situations because they can no longer hear, and that may hasten their cognitive decline as mental resources are used to hear and not process information. Taste and smell can also be impacted, and though that is less discriminating with age, there's a decline in the taste buds and the olfactory bulbs, which could lead the elderly to eat less and have poorer nutrition. They might oversalt their food, which could lead to high blood pressure because their taste senses have changed. Now let's take a little bit of a review of some physical factors. And here is our first learning check. Blank aging involves universal and irreversible changes that, as a result of genetic programming, occur as people get older. And hopefully you knew the answer as D, primary aging. Here's another question. The most common cause of blindness in people older than 60 is what? And hopefully you knew the answer as A, age-related macular degeneration. Let's talk about how the people in late adulthood could be impacted by aging health-wise. There could be some physical disorders that lead to death, such as heart disease, cancer, and chronic respiratory problems. The most chronic long-term condition that's suffered by people in late adulthood is arthritis and hypertension. About 15 to 25% of people over 65 have a mental disorder, with major depression being most prevalent. And that's probably linked to the fact of not having their own things, or losing their freedom or independence, not having others around them. Drug interactions are also common. Some people might suffer from neurocognitive disorders, which are marked by declining memory, lessened intellectual abilities, and impaired judgment. Less than 2% of people between ages 60 and 65 have a disorder, but those percentages have doubled every 5 years. Alzheimer's disease can also become a problem. There are about 100,000 people who die from Alzheimer's every year. 19% of people who die are ages 75 to 84, or who have Alzheimer's, and 50% of those people over 85 are affected. The symptoms of Alzheimer's disease include unusual forgetfulness, trouble recalling particular words during conversations. First, recent memory goes, then the older memories go. Eventually, the person, as they progress through the disorder, might have total confusion or an inability to speak intelligibly or to recognize family and friends. Towards the end, they may also experience muscle control and confinement to the bed and have lots of muscle loss. Victims in early stages may also show anxiety, fear, and depression. The brain changes significantly if Alzheimer's disease is developed. There's a precursor protein that's there that can lead to the death of cells to the hippocampus, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe. We don't know what triggers this. It could be something that's genetic. It could also be related to diet, and high blood pressure may make a person at risk. Viruses and dysfunctions of the immune system and hormone imbalances, as well as low cognitive ability, might also play a role. So if we take a look at figure 9-5, we can see what a normal brain looks like, and then we can see a brain with Alzheimer's disease that has a number of plaques on it and a lot more activity. Right now, there is no known treatment for Alzheimer's disease. We do have some drugs that can increase the amount of acetylcholine in the brain, because the acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that tends to decrease when a person develops Alzheimer's disease. Also, we can have anti inflammatory drugs that help with slowing the depletion of acetylcholine, as well as chemicals that are high in C and E. For most people who develop Alzheimer's disease, they need constant care, so they end up in nursing homes, and their caregivers often suffer secondary effects of the disease because it can be tough to care give and be there for someone who doesn't remember a lot of their experiences with you. So, some of the ways we can help those with Alzheimer's is to help them feel secure and occupied as long as possible. Label things so that they can hopefully read it and notice what it is. Give them calendars with detailed lists. Keep clothing simple. Put bathing on a schedule. Prevent them from driving. Monitor their use of the telephone. Help provide them with exercise. Um, and caregiver self care is also going to be critical. Maybe a support group or something else besides constantly being in caregiving mode. And then also contacting support services. There are a few determinants of things that can lead to illness in late adulthood, such as genetic predisposition, environmental conditions, economic well being, psychological factors, affordability of health care, and there has to also be a willingness to promote good health. So, eating wisely, exercising, and avoiding unhealthy behaviors will be important. People are sexually active well into their 80s and 90s. Good physical and mental health are necessary, and sexual activity can help with the exercise needed by people who are in late adulthood. Previous sexual activity will increase desire for sex. Regular sex is associated with increased lifespan, and about 50% of men and 33% of women over 70 masturbate. Two-thirds of men and women over 70 have sex with their spouse at least once a week. It tends to take men longer to get an erection as they enter late adulthood, and the refractory period is long. Women may have trouble with lubrication, and sexual transmitted infections can be high, with 10% of people in older adulthood being diagnosed with AIDS. And the rate of a new STI is among the highest rating age group because many of them aren't practicing safe sex. There are two theories regarding aging. There's genetic pre-programming, which says that the death gene directs the body to deteriorate. There's also genetic instructions that may only be read a limited number of times that support evidence, including the shortening of telomeres. And then there's the wear and tear theory that says free radicals created when the body builds resources continually help with the aging process. And having an optimistic view that longevity can be increased by removing free radicals is also possible. Both of those theories are supported by research and can explain some aspects of aging. When it comes to life expectancy, it's been steadily increasing over the last few years. Life expectancy for the person born in 2018 is 77 years for a male and 81 years for a female. In 1776, the average life expectancy was 35, and in 1900, the average life expectancy was 47. By 2050, the average life expectancy is predicted to be 80 because health conditions are better. Many diseases are wiped out or even better controlled through medicine. People's working conditions are better, and there's also better lifestyle choices being made. The maximum human lifespan is believed to hover around 120. Not many people live beyond that age. There are a few people believe that people can postpone aging and they may engage in any form of therapy or radiation or gene therapy that can help them do that. When it comes to the lifespan of different races, ethnicities, and genders, the average white child in the United States is expected to live about 71 years, where the average black child is expected to live about 75 years. The average Japanese child will most likely live about 85 years, and the average child born in Afghanistan is likely to live just 52 years. Women tend to live 7 years longer than men on average. And here's a review of some of the impacts of aging and health. And let's go ahead and do a little review question. Alzheimer's disease, blank, leads to the death of 100,000 people every year in the United States and affects nearly half of all people older than 85. And the correct answer is C, a progressive brain disorder, which is Alzheimer's disease. Here's another question. Blank theories of aging suggest that our DNA contains a built-in time limit for reproduction of human cells. And that correct answer, I hope you said, is C. Now let's go ahead and talk about intelligence and how that changes as we enter late adulthood. There's a belief that older people lose their cognitive abilities, and that has primarily happened because of misinterpretation of research. Cross-sectional research studies have been used that don't control for cohort effects, and those longitudinal studies can suffer practice effects as well. So same as what we talked about in middle adulthood. More recent research has attempted to address drawbacks of earlier research, and there's been some sequential methods that combine cross-sectional and longitudinal methods to examine different age groups at a number of points in time. Those generations have been supported by research with no uniform pattern of age-related changes occurring. And for some, cognitive abilities decline by age 67. There are individual differences in patterns of change. We can also look at environmental and culture factors. There's lesser declines associated with good health, high socioeconomic status, involvement in intellectually stimulating environments, flexible personality, being married to a bright spouse, having good perceptual processing speed, and being satisfied, self-satisfied. According to Say, it's necessary to have practice and motivation in order to increase brain plasticity. And according to Salthouse, we have to have cognitive reserve that allows us to continue to perform at a high mental capacity into late adulthood. So here are some things to review from this section. And let's go ahead and do another learning check. One problem with conducting cross-sectional research on aging and cognition is that this method does not take into consideration what that influences that are attributable to growing up in a particular era. And that's going to be C, cohort effects. Here's another question. The relationship between environmental factors and intellectual skills suggests that with blank, older people can maintain their mental abilities. And the correct answer is B, exercise a kind spouse and a flexible personality. Now let's talk a little bit about memory and learning. Memory changes in late adulthood. Most losses occur in episodic memories, so remembering those specific episodes and things that happened in life. Semantic and implicit memories are largely unaffected. Short-term memories tend to decline, usually starting about 70 and become more pronounced. Information presented quickly and verbally is forgotten sooner, and new information is more difficult to recall. Autobiographical memories, which are recalling the days of our lives, tends to follow a Pollyanna principle. People recall material that fits their current self view, and their most recent periods of life are more easily recalled. Changes that occur in memory can occur in three categories. You can have environmental factors such as drugs, retirement, and low motivation, or information processing deficits such as an inability to inhibit irrelevant information and thoughts, which declines, and speed of processing that declines, difficulty paying attention and organizing information, and less efficient retrieval methods. Changes in memory can focus on three categories: biological factors, such as brain and body deterioration, frontal lobe reduction of estrogen, loss of cells in the hippocampus, and some deficits that occur without any underlying biology. It's important to have a continuation of education because that can improve cognitive skills. Older adults have no problem in rigorous classes, and professors and other students find older people's life experiences can also enrich their classroom experiences. And that's why a lot of people in older age might go on to achieve another degree. One of the biggest generational divides is with technology. People 65 and over are less likely to use technology than younger people are. Older adults are less motivated to learn and use technology because it's usually not required for their job. It's more difficult when their fluid intelligence declines, and the divide will decrease as technology use becomes more widespread. So, here are some things we need to review in this section. And let's go ahead and do a learning check. When it comes to autobiographical memories, older individuals, like younger individuals, follow the blank in that they are more likely to remember pleasant memories. And that, of course, is the C, Pollyanna principle. Here's another question. It is likely that the gap in technology skills between younger and older adults will decrease as what? Then the correct answer would be B, as technology use continues to expand in general society. Now let's talk about personality development and successful aging. According to Costa and McCrae, the big five traits of personality remain stable across the lifespan, across adulthood. Changes in personality do occur due to new challenges and changes in social environments. To explain those changes, theorists have focused on the discontinuities of development. According to Eric Erickson, this is the period of time when people are facing ego integrity versus despair. This was a period characterized by processing of reviewing one's life and coming to terms with it. Integrity involves people feeling they fulfill their possibilities. And despair usually occurs when people are dissatisfied and feeling happy, depressed, angry, or despondent. According to Peck's developmental task, he said that redefinition of self versus preoccupation with a work role happens, as well as body transcendence versus body preoccupation, and ego transcendence versus ego preoccupation. Levinson's final season and the winter of life is the transitional time period between 60 and 65. People begin to view themselves as entering late adulthood, and they struggle with being old. People struggle with the loss of power, respect, and authority. People can serve as advisors for the young, and they bring freedom for fun and entertainment. So, as people cope with aging, there's been a lot of studies to determine how people cope. And it's been found that there are four personality types of people in their 70s. There's the disintegrated and disorganized personality, the passive dependent personalities, the defendant personalities, and the integrated personalities. The common theme of personality development is all about life review and major trends towards running through the work of Erickson, Peck, and other psychologists. And according to Robert Butler, there's life review is triggered by the awareness of impending death. There are some benefits to also reviewing life: better understanding of one's life, resolution of lingering problems, a sense of sharing and mutuality, and that may improve memory. The cost of life review may produce decline in psychological function, and an obsession with the past may lead to guilt, depression, and anger. Age stratification theorists look at power and prestige for the elderly and say that has eroded. Young people are far removed from their elders and feel unimportant, and the elders feel unimportant. There's rapidly changing technology, which makes them feel out of date, and there's a loss of social status that requires a lot of adjustment. In less industrialized countries, elderly are viewed more positively. Cultural differences may also be exaggerated. Asian, Latin, and African societies revere old age, and Western societies hold older people in little esteem. The characteristics of cultures that reverse old age is socioeconomically homogenous, and elderlies, they control finances. The elderly continue to engage in meaningful activities and that are organized around their extended family. And there are also strong ideals that are not always followed up with behavior. Sons and wives care for their elderly, and those with daughters face old age alone. So we have to think about wisdom when we start to think about late adulthood. And wisdom has to do with knowledge that's related to the here and now. It's timeless. It provides understanding of human nature, and that intelligence permits logical thinking. It's really hard to operationalize one distinct definition of it, but research shows us that older adults do utilize a more sophisticated theory of mind than younger people do. Disengagement theory is the theory that in late adulthood marks gradual withdrawal from the world on psychological, physiological, and social levels. This is when people become more flexible, reflective about their lives, less constrained by social rules, and more discerning about relationships. They tend to keep those that meet their needs. Most gerontologists reject that theory. They believe that these automatic universal processes happen for all people in a late adulthood, and it doesn't happen automatically. Continued improvement theory suggests that aging occurs when people maintain their interests, activities, and social interactions. Happiness and satisfaction is tied to a high level of involvement, and they refine replacement activities that must be something meaningful, and sometimes slowing down can work well. The compromise position suggests that people simply need to maintain their desired level of involvement in society to maximize their sense of well being and self esteem. Other factors that can enhance happiness are good physical and mental health, financial security, and a sense of autonomy and a positive outlook. The general model of successful aging says that people use selective optimism to overcome changes in old age, and life is reduced in some areas but modified and successful in others. So, here are some things we can review about personality development and how it changes in old age. And let's go ahead and look at a question. According to Erickson, individuals in late adulthood engage in looking back over their lives, evaluating their experiences, and coming to terms with decisions. This is known as what? And hopefully you said ego integrity versus despair, which is D. Here's another question. Models of successful aging include what? And the correct answer should be B. Now let's move on and talk about the daily life of those in late adulthood. Those who live at home are only about 5% of elderly. Um, Only 5% of elderly in their lives in a nursing home. Two-thirds of people over the age of 65 live with family members. Most of them live with their spouse. They have to adjust to living with their children, which can be hard. African Americans are more likely to live in multi generational settings. Some people go into specialized living environments, such as a continuing care community or a nursing institution. Adult daycare facilities and skilled nursing facilities are very popular, with 4.5% of those over 65 being in one of them and 10% of those over 85. Institutionalism and learned helplessness can occur. The fear of those in nursing homes can lead to institutionalism, apathy, indifference, and lack of caring. It can be brought on by learned helplessness, which is the belief that one has no control over their own environment. Langer and Jonas found that those given some choices and control tend to live longer lives. When it comes to economics, people who are well off in young adulthood stay that way. 10% of the elderly live below the poverty line. Women are twice as likely to live in poverty as men in late adulthood. 25% of women living alone live below the poverty line, and 8% of whites live below the poverty line, while 19% of Hispanics and 24% of African Americans live below the poverty line. The reason this happens is because many elderly live on a fixed income. They get Social Security, they get a pension, they get a savings, but it's always fixed. It doesn't get higher. And they face rising healthcare costs. On average, elderly spend 20% of their income on their healthcare, and nursing homes can cost about $80,000 a year. So, when to retire becomes a big decision for those in late adulthood. Some struggle with the identity shift, and retirement may offer a life of leisure to others. They have to try to combat age discrimination because it remains a reality despite laws against it. Mandatory retirement is illegal except for public safety jobs. And when the workforce shrinks, companies may offer incentives for those who are in the older generation to stay. The decision to retire can be based on a number of factors such as burnout, stress, declining health, incentives, and the desire to travel and see family more. So there's typically some stages people will go through as they're trying to make a decision about whether they will retire, including the honeymoon stage, disenchantment, reorientation, retirement routine, and termination. Not everyone passes through each of the stages, and the sequence is not universal. If a person decides to retire and is having a good retirement, they usually plan ahead financially. They consider tapering off from work gradually. They explore their interests before they retire. If you're married or in a long term partnership, you spend some time discussing your views of the ideal retirement with your partner. You consider where you want to live. You don't live too close to your kids and grandkids, and you plan to volunteer your time. So, here are some review questions, statements to also consider. And there are some other review statements. And let's go ahead and do a question. After retiring from work, people often pass through a series of stages, including what? And hopefully you said A. Now let's talk about relationships. More men than women over 65 are married, with 70% of women who outlive their husbands. The marriage gradient makes remarriage easy for elderly men. The vast majority of people who are still married report that they're satisfied. Their partners provide substantial companionship and emotional support. They have great insight into each other, and the stress of retirement could impact their marriage. About 12% of divorces involve women over 66. The husband may be abusive or alcoholic and found with a younger woman. Psychological turmoil can also occur when retirement occurs, and divorce can be harder on women than men. Women feel they've failed and their quality of life can decrease. They can seek out a new relationship, and that may become a priority. 5% of the elderly may marry, and late adulthood has few changes for them. They never remarry. Retirement can also mean the relationship can be tiring. Couples spend so much time together, they share the household chores. Men can become less competitive and more affiliative, and women can become more assertive and autonomous. When it comes to caring for an aging spouse, there are shifts in health, which means one may have to take care of the other. They may provide closeness and ability to demonstrate love and devotion. The caregiver may lose health as well, and 70% of the time, the wife is the caregiver. When the death of a spouse or partner occurs, there are a few events that are more painful than that. They no longer, um, they're no longer a part of a couple. They must deal with profound grief. They have no one to share their life with. Their social life often changes, and there's an economic shift that can occur. So, adjusting to widowhood can happen in 3 stages. There's preparation, grief, and mourning that can last months to years, and adaptation. These stages do not apply to everyone, and some people may suffer complicated grief. It's important to have friendships because friendships make others a valued member of the family and provide more flexibility than family. And when a spouse dies, friends can help fill those gaps. And a loss of a good friend can be very hard to deal with. Friendships also provide social support, and that's important for successful aging. They provide an ear. They can sympathize that they've experienced the same crisis. They can furnish material support and reciprocity, and getting back from what they give is also important. There can also be connections with family and extended family, which is important for comfort. Siblings become more important because of shared experience, and children become more important than siblings because the parents have greater developmental stakes in them, and most parents and children stay close even in older age. Not all grandparents are equally involved. Grandmothers tend to be more involved than grandfathers, with African American grandparents being more involved than white grandparents. Most grandparents don't have a tight connection with their great grandchildren unless they live in close proximity, and many great grandparents profit emotionally from merely knowing they have them. Elders can also experience abuse, and that usually occurs in 11% of those who are elderly. There could be psychological or physical maltreatment and neglect. They're most frequently directed at family members, and people with Alzheimer's are more susceptible. The best prevention is frequent breaks and assistance from social support agencies. And if you suspect abuse, you should contact the authorities immediately. Here are some review questions for relationships in older adulthood. And a review question. The first stage of adjustment to the death of a spouse is known as what? And the correct answer is B, preparation. Okay, so that is everything I wanted to tell you guys about Chapter 9, Older Adulthood.